The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered hotel, and Rebecca Thompson stepped down onto the frozen mud of El Dorado, Kansas, feeling as though her heart had turned to ice along with everything else around her. January of 1881 had brought a bitter cold snap to this prairie town, and the wind cut through her traveling coat like 1,000 tiny knives, but she barely felt it because the cold inside her ran so much deeper. Her father was dead. Her mother had passed 2 years before that, and the small inheritance that should have seen her through had been stolen by the lawyer she had trusted, a man who had disappeared into the vastness of the American West with everything she owned except the clothes on her back and the $23 sewn into the hem of her skirt. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, her leather trunk at her feet, watching her breath form white clouds in the air, and wondered what she was supposed to do now. The advertisement she had answered seemed like a cruel joke in retrospect. A family in El Dorado seeking a governess for their 3 children, room and board included, modest salary. She had written immediately, received an enthusiastic response, and used her last funds to book passage from St. Louis. But when she had arrived at the address given in the letter, she found an empty lot where the house should have been, and the neighbors told her no such family had ever lived there. Someone had played a terrible trick, or perhaps the letter had been meant for a different town entirely, but either way, Rebecca was stranded in a place where she knew no one, with winter closing in and almost no money to her name. She picked up her trunk, surprised at how light it felt now that it contained only her few remaining possessions, and walked toward the hotel. The sign above the door read Grand Hotel in fading gold letters, though there was nothing grand about the 2-story structure with its peeling paint and sagging porch. Inside, the lobby was warmer but not by much, heated by a pot-bellied stove that glowed red in the corner. An older woman with steel-gray hair looked up from behind the desk, her expression neither welcoming nor hostile, just tired. "I need a room," Rebecca said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just for tonight." The woman quoted a price that would take half of Rebecca's remaining money, but what choice did she have? She could not sleep in the street in this cold. She paid, received a key, and climbed the narrow stairs to a small room that smelled of old tobacco and loneliness. The window looked out over the main street of El Dorado, where a few hardy souls hurried past, bundled against the cold. In the distance, she could see the prairie stretching away endlessly, covered in a thin layer of snow that glittered in the weak afternoon sunlight. Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed and tried not to cry. She was 22 years old, alone in the world, and she had no idea what to do next. The hopelessness that had been growing inside her since her father's death now threatened to overwhelm her completely. She thought about the life she had expected to have, the quiet respectability of her childhood home in St. Louis, the security of family and familiar streets. All of that was gone now, and she was adrift in a harsh land that did not care whether she lived or died. She did not remember falling asleep, but she must have, because when she opened her eyes, the room was dark and her body was stiff with cold. The temperature had dropped even further, and her breath was visible even inside the room. She wrapped herself in the thin blanket and tried to think. Tomorrow she would have to find work, any kind of work, enough to earn money for food and lodging. After that, she would figure out the rest. But the next morning brought bad news. Rebecca walked up and down the main street of El Dorado, stopping at every business, every shop, asking if they needed help. The general store did not. The restaurant did not. The dressmaker already had an apprentice. The schoolhouse had a teacher who had been there for 10 years and showed no signs of leaving. By midday, Rebecca's feet were numb from the cold and her spirits had sunk even lower. She had spent another $1 on a meager breakfast, and her funds were dwindling at an alarming rate. She was standing outside the general store, trying to decide what to do next, when a man rode past on a tall bay horse. He was in his mid-20s, she guessed, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and eyes that were a striking shade of blue-green, like the rivers she had seen on the journey west. He wore the practical clothes of a working cattleman, sturdy denim trousers and a heavy coat lined with sheepskin. And there was something about the way he sat his horse that spoke of long hours in the saddle and a comfortable relationship with the animal beneath him. He happened to glance her way as he passed, and their eyes met for just a moment. Rebecca looked away quickly, embarrassed to be caught staring, but she had the impression of kindness in that brief glance, and something else she could not quite name. Then he was past, tying his horse to the rail outside the saloon and disappearing through the swinging doors. She continued her search, but by late afternoon she had to admit defeat. No one in El Dorado needed her services, and even if they had, most people seemed reluctant to hire a young woman traveling alone with no references and no family to vouch for her character. She returned to the hotel, climbed the stairs to her room, and sat by the window watching the sun set over the frozen prairie. Tomorrow her money would run out, and then what? She could not stay at the hotel. She could not eat. The cold would kill her if hunger did not. For the first time in her life, Rebecca truly understood what it meant to be without hope. She had always believed that if she worked hard and behaved properly and trusted in Providence, things would work out. But Providence seemed to have forgotten about her, and hard work meant nothing if no one would hire you. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window and let the tears come at last, silent and bitter. She did not hear the knock at first, so lost was she in her own misery, but when it came again, louder, she wiped her eyes and went to the door. The hotel keeper stood in the hallway, her expression unchanged. "There is a gentleman downstairs asking to speak with you," the woman said. "Says his name is Isaac Landry, and he has a business proposition." Rebecca's first instinct was fear. She knew what kinds of propositions strange men offered to young women alone in frontier towns, but what choice did she have? She straightened her dress, tucked her hair behind her ears, and followed the woman downstairs. The man waiting in the lobby was the same one she had seen riding past that morning. Up close, he was taller than she had realized, perhaps 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the weathered tan of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. His hat was in his hands, and he turned it nervously as she approached, which struck her as oddly endearing for someone who looked so capable and self-assured. "Miss Thompson," he said, and his voice was deep and warm with the slight drawl of someone who had spent time in Texas or Oklahoma. "My name is Isaac Landry. I hope you will forgive the intrusion, but I heard you were looking for work." "That is correct," Rebecca said cautiously, "though I confess I am surprised that news traveled so quickly." He gave a slight smile that softened his features. "El Dorado is a small town, Miss Thompson. Word gets around. I own a ranch about 5 miles west of here, the Double L. I run about 200 head of cattle and a dozen horses. It is not a large operation, but it keeps me busy, especially in winter." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts. "My housekeeper left 3 weeks ago to live with her daughter in Topeka. She was getting on in years and found the isolation difficult. I have been managing on my own since then, but I am not much of a cook, and the house is in a state that would shame my mother if she could see it. I need someone to help with the domestic work. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, that sort of thing. Room and board included, and $30 a month." Rebecca stared at him, afraid to believe what she was hearing. $30 a month was more than she had expected from the governess position. Room and board meant she would not starve or freeze, but she forced herself to be cautious. "Why are you offering this to me, Mr. Landry? You do not know me. I have no references. For all you know, I could be a thief or worse." He met her eyes directly, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. "I am a pretty good judge of character, Miss Thompson, and I can see you are neither a thief nor worse. I can see you are in a difficult situation through no fault of your own, and I need help. It seems like we might be able to help each other." "How did you even know my name?" she asked. "I asked Mrs. Patterson at the desk," he said, nodding toward the hotel keeper, who was making a show of examining her ledger but was clearly listening to every word. "She said you had arrived yesterday and were looking for the family that was supposed to hire you as a governess, but they did not exist. She said you seemed like a respectable young lady who had fallen on hard times." Rebecca felt her cheeks flush. So the whole town knew her business already. But perhaps that was for the best. At least it meant Isaac Landry had some sense of who she was and why she needed work so desperately. "It would be entirely proper," he continued. "You would have your own room, of course. The ranch is isolated, but we are close enough to town that you could visit whenever you liked, provided the weather cooperates. And if you find the arrangement does not suit you, I would pay your fare to wherever you wanted to go." She wanted to say yes immediately, but she forced herself to think it through. Going to live on an isolated ranch with a man she did not know was risky. But staying in El Dorado with no money and no prospects was certain disaster. And there was something about Isaac Landry that inspired trust, a straightforwardness in his manner that suggested he meant exactly what he said. "When would you need me to start?" she asked. His face brightened, and she realized he had been more worried about her answer than he had let on. "Tomorrow, if you are willing. I have my wagon outside. I was planning to pick up supplies before heading back to the ranch. If you agree, you could ride out with me, get settled in before dark." Rebecca took a deep breath. "All right, Mr. Landry, I accept your offer." They shook hands, his grip firm and warm, and Rebecca felt something shift inside her, a tiny crack in the ice that had encased her heart. It was not hope, not yet, but perhaps it was the possibility of hope, and that was more than she had felt in a very long time. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Rebecca packed her few belongings back into her trunk, paid Mrs. Patterson for her second night, and met Isaac in front of the hotel. He loaded her trunk into the back of a sturdy wagon pulled by two large draft horses, then helped her up onto the seat. His hand was strong and steady, and Rebecca found herself very aware of his presence beside her as they set off down the frozen road. For the first mile or so, they rode in silence. Rebecca watched the landscape roll past, the endless prairie broken only by occasional stands of cottonwood trees along the creek beds. The sky was a pale winter blue, and the snow sparkled in the morning light. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, and Rebecca understood why some people fell in love with this land while others fled from it as fast as they could. "I should tell you a bit about the ranch," Isaac said, breaking the silence. "It is not fancy, but it is comfortable. The house has 4 rooms downstairs, kitchen, sitting room, dining room, and my office, and 3 bedrooms upstairs. You would have the room at the end of the hall. There is a pump in the kitchen for water, and a good stove that heats the house pretty well. The privy is out back, and there is a chicken coop where we keep about a dozen hens. I have 2 ranch hands who work for me, Tom and Miguel. They live in the bunkhouse and take their meals there, so you would not have to cook for them unless you wanted to. Mostly it is just me to cook for, and I am not particular. Anything better than burned beans and half-raw biscuits would be a blessing." Rebecca smiled despite herself. I can certainly manage better than that. My mother was an excellent cook, and she taught me well. Then I am already ahead, Isaac said with a grin that transformed his serious face into something much younger and more carefree. I should warn you, though, ranch life can be monotonous, especially in winter. There is not much to do except keep the house and wait for spring. If you like reading, I have a fair collection of books, and if you get too lonely, we can hitch up the wagon and go into town. It is only an hour each way when the roads are good. I am used to solitude, Rebecca said quietly. After my mother died, it was just my father and me. And after he passed, I was alone in that house for weeks before I decided to head west. I think I can manage monotony. What happened to your father? Isaac asked, then quickly added, I am sorry, that is none of my business. You do not have to answer. But Rebecca found she wanted to talk about it, wanted to tell someone the story she had been carrying alone for so long. He was a school teacher, she said. A good man, kind and gentle, but not very worldly. He trusted people, believed the best of them. When he died, there was supposed to be enough money to see me through, but the lawyer he had hired to manage his affairs took it all and disappeared. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. I could not stay in St. Louis. Everything reminded me of what I had lost. So when I saw the advertisement for the governess position, it seemed like a sign, a chance to start over somewhere new. And instead you found yourself stranded in Kansas with no prospects, Isaac said. That must have been terrifying. It was, Rebecca admitted. It still is, if I am honest. But your offer gives me a chance, and I am grateful for that. They lapsed into silence again, but it was more comfortable now, the silence of two people who were beginning to know each other. Rebecca studied Isaac from the corner of her eye, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands held the reins with easy competence, the small scar above his left eyebrow that she wondered about. He was handsome, she thought, but more than that, he seemed solid and reliable, the kind of man you could depend on in a crisis. As if sensing her gaze, he turned to look at her, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither looked away, and Rebecca felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear or cold. Then Isaac smiled, and she found herself smiling back, and she felt that crack in the ice around her heart widen just a little bit more. The Double L Ranch came into view just before noon, a collection of buildings arranged in a rough semicircle around a central yard. The house was larger than Rebecca had expected, 2 stories of weathered wood with a wide porch wrapped around the front and side. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see curtains in the windows, which suggested the house was not completely neglected. Behind the house were a barn, a bunkhouse, a chicken coop, and several smaller outbuildings she could not identify. Isaac pulled the wagon up to the front porch and jumped down, then came around to help Rebecca down. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her, and she was very aware of the strength in those hands, the warmth of them even through her coat. He set her down gently and stepped back, and she thought she saw a faint flush on his cheeks, but it might have been just the cold. "Welcome to the Double L," he said. "Let me show you inside." The interior of the house was warmer than Rebecca had expected, heated by a large stove in the kitchen and a fireplace in the sitting room. The furniture was simple but well made, and there were small touches that spoke of a woman's presence in the past, embroidered cushions on the chairs, a vase on the mantel, lace curtains in the windows. But there was also a layer of dust over everything, and the kitchen was in the state of cheerful chaos that only a bachelor living alone could achieve. "I know it is a mess," Isaac said apologetically. "I have been doing my best, but cooking and cleaning are not my strong suits. My housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, kept everything spotless. I did not realize how much work she was doing until she left. It is not so bad, Rebecca said, though privately she thought it would take her days to get everything properly clean. I have seen worse. Why don't you show me my room and then I will get started? Her room was at the end of the upstairs hall as Isaac had promised, a good-sized space with a window overlooking the prairie to the west. There was a bed with a thick quilt, a dresser, a small table and chair, and a braided rug on the floor. It was simple but comfortable, and it was hers, which was more than she had been able to say about any space for weeks now. If you need anything, more blankets or whatever, just let me know, Isaac said from the doorway. He seemed reluctant to come inside, which Rebecca appreciated. Some men would have taken the opportunity to press their advantage, but Isaac was clearly making an effort to be respectful of her privacy. I will bring up your trunk. He disappeared and returned a moment later with her trunk on his shoulder, making it look effortless despite its weight. He set it down at the foot of the bed, tipped his hat to her, and left, closing the door behind him. Rebecca stood alone in her new room and allowed herself a moment to just breathe. She was safe, at least for now. She had a roof over her head and the promise of steady work. It was not much, but it was so much more than she had yesterday that she felt tears prick her eyes again, though this time they were tears of relief rather than despair. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her hairbrush and hand mirror on the dresser. Then she changed into her work dress, a sturdy gray wool that had seen better days but was still serviceable, tied an apron around her waist, and went downstairs to begin her new life. The kitchen was indeed a disaster. Dirty dishes were piled in the sink, the stove needed blacking, and there were crumbs and spills on every surface. But Rebecca had cleaned before, and she knew how to organize her work for maximum efficiency. She heated water on the stove, found soap and rags, and set to work. By late afternoon, the kitchen was spotless. The dishes were clean and put away, and she had started a pot of stew with vegetables and salt pork she found in the pantry. Isaac came in just as the sun was setting, stamping his boots on the porch to knock off the snow. He stopped in the doorway of the kitchen and stared. "I cannot believe you did all this in one afternoon," he said. "It looks like a completely different room." "It just needed some attention," Rebecca said, stirring the stew. "Dinner will be ready in about an hour if that suits you." "That suits me just fine," Isaac said. "I will wash up and be back down shortly." They ate dinner at the table in the kitchen, which seemed more informal and comfortable than the dining room. The stew was simple but hearty, and Isaac ate 3 helpings, praising each one. Rebecca found herself relaxing in his company, enjoying the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with someone after so many weeks alone. They talked about small things, the ranch, the weather, the quirks of the chickens in the coop, and Rebecca discovered that Isaac had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh. After dinner, Isaac insisted on helping her with the dishes despite her protests. They worked side by side at the sink, and Rebecca was very aware of how close he was, the warmth of his body, the occasional brush of his arm against hers. It was not unpleasant, quite the opposite, and that realization brought its own set of complications. The days fell into a pattern after that. Rebecca woke early, lit the fires, prepared breakfast, and sent Isaac off to his work with a full stomach. Then she tackled the endless tasks of keeping the house, cleaning, washing, mending, baking bread, planning meals. It was hard work, but it was honest work, and she took pride in seeing the house transform under her care. The dust disappeared, the floors gleamed, the windows sparkled. She found Mrs. Henderson's old recipe book and tried her hand at more complicated dishes, pies and cakes and roasts, delighting in Isaac's reactions when he tasted them. Isaac, for his part, was unfailingly courteous and kind. He never made demands, always asked if she needed anything from town, and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions on everything from politics to literature. He told her about his life, how he had come to Kansas from Missouri 5 years ago with nothing but a horse and a dream of owning his own land. He had worked as a ranch hand for 3 years, saving every penny until he had enough to buy this property. It had been a struggle, especially in the beginning, but he had persevered, and now the double L was starting to turn a profit. "Next year I am hoping to increase the herd," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire in the sitting room. He had taken to spending his evenings there rather than in his office, and Rebecca suspected it was because she was usually there as well, reading or mending. "If beef prices hold steady, I should be able to buy another 50 head in the spring. And I want to improve the breeding stock, bring in a good bull from Texas." "It sounds like you have big plans," Rebecca said, setting down her sewing. "I do," Isaac admitted. "I want this ranch to be something I can be proud of, something that will last." "I know that probably sounds silly, worrying about the future when the present is uncertain enough." "It does not sound silly at all," Rebecca said. "Everyone needs something to work toward, some kind of hope for better days." Isaac looked at her intently, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Do you have hopes for better days, Rebecca?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and she found she liked the sound of it in his voice. "I am beginning to," she said softly. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like maybe things will be all right." "I am glad," Isaac said, and the warmth in his voice made her cheeks flush. The weeks passed, and January gave way to February. The cold persisted, but Rebecca barely noticed it anymore. She was too busy, too content in her work, and if she was honest with herself, too distracted by her growing feelings for Isaac. She found herself watching for him during the day, listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, timing her baking so that cookies would be fresh from the oven when he came in for the noon meal. And in the evenings, she treasured the hours they spent together by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from the profound to the ridiculous. Isaac seemed equally affected. He found excuses to come into the house during the day, to check on something or ask her opinion about ranch matters that she suspected he was perfectly capable of deciding on his own. He brought her small gifts from town, a new ribbon for her hair, a book he thought she might enjoy, a bar of lavender soap. And sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race, a mixture of tenderness and longing that mirrored her own feelings. But neither of them spoke of what was growing between them. Rebecca told herself it was too soon, that she was his employee and it would be inappropriate, that she could not risk losing her position by revealing feelings he might not share. And Isaac seemed to be wrestling with similar doubts, because though he was always warm and kind, he never crossed the line into anything that could be considered improper. It was in mid-February that everything changed. Rebecca had gone out to the chicken coop to gather eggs, bundled in her coat and shawl against the cold. The hens were laying well despite the weather, and she had nearly filled her basket when she heard shouts from the direction of the barn. She hurried toward the sound and found Isaac and his 2 ranch hands gathered around one of the horses, a young mare who was clearly in distress. "What is wrong?" Rebecca asked, setting down her basket. "She is trying to foal, but something is wrong," Isaac said, his face tight with worry. "The foal is breech, and she has been laboring for hours. I am not sure she is going to make it." Rebecca had never dealt with livestock in distress before, but she knew about fear and pain and the importance of staying calm in a crisis. "What can I do to help?" Isaac looked at her in surprise, as if he had not expected her to offer. "Can you hold her head, keep her calm? I need to try to turn the foal and it is going to hurt her." Rebecca did not hesitate. She knelt in the straw beside the mare's head, stroking her neck and speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. The horse's eyes were rolling with fear and pain, but at Rebecca's touch, she seemed to calm slightly. Isaac and Miguel worked at the other end, and Rebecca kept her focus on the mare, murmuring nonsense words, telling her it would be all right, that she was brave and strong. It seemed to take forever, though it was probably only 30 minutes. The mare screamed and thrashed, and Rebecca held on, tears streaming down her face at the animal's suffering. But finally, miraculously, there was a wet slide and a gasp from Isaac, and then the thin, trembling cry of a newborn foal. "We did it," Isaac said, his voice shaking with relief. "They are both going to be fine." Rebecca looked up and saw the foal, a tiny chestnut filly, wet and gangly and absolutely perfect. The mare was already trying to turn to nuzzle her baby, and Rebecca moved back to give them space. She stood up on shaking legs and found Isaac standing beside her, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold, his face smudged with dirt and blood. "You were amazing," he said, looking at her with something like awe. "I could not have done that without you." "Yes, you could have," Rebecca said, but she was smiling. "But I am glad I could help." They walked back to the house together, exhausted and elated. Isaac insisted that Rebecca sit down while he made tea, a role reversal that amused them both. They sat at the kitchen table, drinking the too strong tea and eating leftover biscuits, and talking about the birth, the relief of it, the miracle of new life in the midst of a frozen winter. "I have been thinking," Isaac said suddenly, setting down his cup, "about something I need to say to you, but I have been too afraid to say it because I did not want to scare you away." Rebecca's heart began to pound. "What is it?" Isaac took a deep breath. "I know you came here out of necessity because you needed work and I needed help. And I know it has only been a few weeks. But Rebecca, having you here has changed everything for me. This house felt empty before, like I was just going through the motions of living. Now it feels like a home. And it is not just the clean floors and the good meals, though I appreciate those more than I can say. It is you. Your presence, your kindness, the way you care about things, even a frightened horse you had never met before. You make everything better, and I find myself thinking about you constantly, hoping you are happy here, hoping you might want to stay not just as my housekeeper but as something more." Rebecca could hardly breathe. "What are you saying, Isaac?" "I am saying that I am falling in love with you," Isaac said, and his voice was raw with honesty. "I think I have been since the moment I saw you standing outside the general store looking lost and brave at the same time. And I know this is fast, maybe too fast, and you have every right to tell me I am insane. But I could not go another day without telling you how I feel. Hope begins the moment you say you will stay, Rebecca. Not just for now, but for always. As my wife, if you will have me." The tears that had been threatening all evening finally spilled over, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "I am falling in love with you too," Rebecca whispered. "I have been trying not to, trying to tell myself it was impossible, but I cannot help it. You make me feel safe and valued and like maybe I deserve good things after all. So yes, Isaac Landry, I will stay. I will marry you, and I will make a life with you here, and I will be so happy to do it." Isaac stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. He came around the table and pulled Rebecca to her feet. And then he was kissing her, a kiss that tasted of tea and hope and the promise of better days ahead. Rebecca kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks, her arms around his neck, his hands warm on her waist, and she felt the last of the ice around her heart crack and melt away. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this," he said. "I know you will," Rebecca said, "and I will do the same for you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in El Dorado with Tom and Miguel and a few townspeople as witnesses. Rebecca wore a new dress that Isaac had bought for her, a soft blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and Isaac wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Rebecca could hardly believe he was about to become her husband. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, and when the minister pronounced them man and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes again. They held a small celebration at the ranch that evening, with food Rebecca had prepared and music provided by Miguel, who played the guitar surprisingly well. Tom made a toast that was both funny and heartfelt, and even the usually reserved Miguel wished them happiness in his quiet way. As the sun set and their guests departed, Isaac and Rebecca stood on the porch of their home, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. "Happy?" Isaac asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Rebecca said, leaning into his warmth. "When I arrived in El Dorado, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything and there was nothing left to hope for, but I was wrong. I just needed to find you." "We found each other," Isaac corrected gently. "And now we have the rest of our lives to build something beautiful together." That first year of marriage was not without its challenges. Spring brought its own set of difficulties, with calving season keeping Isaac busy from dawn to well past dusk, and Rebecca learning to manage the garden and the expanded chicken flock on her own. But they faced each obstacle together, supporting each other, learning to communicate and compromise, growing closer with each passing day. In June, they took a trip to Topeka to visit Mrs. Henderson, Isaac's former housekeeper, and to purchase supplies for the ranch. Rebecca loved seeing more of Kansas, the rolling hills and prairie flowers and vast open skies. They stayed in a hotel for 2 nights, a small luxury that made them both feel sophisticated and worldly, and they spent hours exploring the city, hand in hand, talking and laughing like the newlyweds they were. By August, the ranch was thriving. Isaac's careful management and hard work were paying off, and the cattle were healthy and multiplying. He was able to hire another ranch hand, a young man named Pete who was eager to learn and willing to work hard. The house was a showplace now, spotlessly clean and beautifully maintained, with Rebecca's touches everywhere, fresh flowers on the table, curtains she had sewn herself, a herb garden just outside the kitchen door. And in September, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she waited to tell Isaac until she was certain. She chose to reveal the news over dinner one evening, and she would never forget the look on his face, the pure joy and wonder and love. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am sure," Rebecca said, smiling through happy tears. "We are going to have a baby, Isaac, in the spring, probably April." He stood up and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and she felt him trembling. "I love you so much," he said. "Both of you. I am going to be a father. I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," Rebecca said, laughing, "because you are going to be changing a lot of diapers come spring." The winter of 1881 into 1882 was milder than the previous year, which Isaac said was a blessing given Rebecca's condition. He fussed over her constantly, worrying that she was working too hard, insisting she rest more, bringing her tea and treats and making sure she was warm enough. Rebecca bore his attentions with good humor, touched by his concern even when it bordered on excessive. She continued to manage the household. though she did let Isaac hire a girl from town, a 15-year-old named Sarah, to help with the heavier work as Rebecca's pregnancy advanced. Sarah was sweet and eager to please, and Rebecca enjoyed teaching her, passing on the skills her own mother had taught her. In late March, as the prairie began to turn green and the first wildflowers appeared, Rebecca's labor began. Isaac rode into town to fetch the doctor while Tom stayed with Rebecca, his weathered face pale with worry. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Rebecca thought she might not survive it, but she held on, thinking of Isaac, of the life they had built together, of the child she was fighting to bring into the world. Dawn was breaking when her son finally arrived, a robust baby with dark hair and a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at being born. The doctor placed him in Rebecca's arms, and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt a love so fierce and overwhelming that it took her breath away. Isaac arrived home to find his wife exhausted but glowing and his son asleep in her arms. He sank to his knees beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, and touched the baby's soft cheek with a trembling finger. "He is perfect," Isaac breathed. "You are both perfect. Thank you, Rebecca." "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for saving me," Rebecca said softly, "for giving me hope when I had none, for making me believe in happy endings again." They named him James, after Isaac's father, and he grew into a sturdy, curious child who loved the ranch and the animals, and following his father around whenever possible. A year and a half later, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, who had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn determination. And 2 years after that came another son, Matthew, who was sunny-natured and easygoing from the start. The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing Isaac to expand the house, adding a proper sitting room and a larger kitchen. Rebecca established a school on the ranch for James and Rose and the children of the ranch hands, teaching them reading and arithmetic and history, passing on her father's legacy of education. On a warm evening in May of 1888, Isaac and Rebecca sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. James was 11 now, tall and serious, helping Matthew build something elaborate with sticks and twine. Rose, at 9, was organizing a tea party for her dolls with the same efficiency her mother brought to household management. "You ever think about that day we met?" Isaac asked, taking Rebecca's hand. "When I saw you standing outside the general store looking so lost." "I think about it often," Rebecca said. "I think about how close I came to giving up entirely. If you had not offered me that job, I do not know what would have happened to me." "I knew the moment I saw you," Isaac said. "I know that sounds like nonsense, but I did. I saw you standing there, and something inside me just knew you were important, that you were going to change my life. So I made up my mind to do something about it." Rebecca turned to look at him, this man who had saved her life in more ways than one. His face was more lined now, weathered by years of work and sun and wind, but he was still the same Isaac who had offered hope to a desperate stranger, the same man who loved her with his whole heart. "You told me that hope begins the moment you say you will stay," Rebecca said. "Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," Isaac said. "It was the most important question I ever asked." "Well, I want you to know that I would say yes again," Rebecca said. 1,000 times yes. Every single day I choose to stay, Isaac. With you, with this life we have built, with the future we are making together. You gave me hope when I had none, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that gift. Isaac pulled her close and kissed her softly. "And I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of the gift you gave me when you said yes. I love you, Rebecca Landry, today and always." Today and always. Rebecca echoed. And as the sun set over the prairie and their children's laughter filled the air, she thought about how far she had come from that frozen, hopeless girl who had stepped off the stagecoach in El Dorado 7 years ago. She had been so certain her life was over that she had nothing left to hope for, but she had been wrong. Hope had been waiting for her all along in the form of a blue-eyed cowboy who saw past her desperation to the woman underneath. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. In 1889, the ranch faced a severe drought that tested everyone's resolve. Water became precious, and they had to drive the cattle miles to find adequate grazing. Isaac worked himself nearly to exhaustion, and Rebecca supported him however she could, managing the household on reduced resources, keeping spirits up, making sure everyone had enough to eat even when it meant she went without. They survived the drought, and the following year brought abundant rain and prosperity. Isaac was able to buy more land, expanding the Double L to over 1,000 acres. He hired more hands to help manage the growing operation, and the ranch became known throughout the region for the quality of its cattle and horses. James grew into a young man who shared his father's love of ranching. By the time he was 15, he was essentially Isaac's partner, capable of handling most ranch operations on his own. Rose proved to have a gift for horses, training them with a patience and intuition that amazed everyone who watched her work. And Matthew, true to his sunny nature, became the peacemaker of the family, the one who could smooth over disputes and make everyone laugh even in difficult times. In 1892, Tom retired after more than a decade of faithful service, moving to town to live with his sister. His departure was bittersweet, but Rebecca and Isaac threw him a wonderful party, and Tom departed knowing he would always have a place at the Double L. Miguel remained, eventually marrying a young woman from El Dorado and building a house on ranch property where they raised their own family. Rebecca continued her school, which had grown to include more than a dozen children from surrounding ranches. She loved teaching, loved seeing young minds develop and grow, loved carrying on her father's work in her own way. Some of her students went on to become teachers themselves, and she took deep pride in knowing she had helped shape their futures. In 1894, Rebecca gave birth to their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Catherine. The pregnancy was unexpected, as Rebecca was 45 by then. But Catherine was healthy and beautiful, and her arrival seemed like a final blessing on their family. She was doted on by her older siblings, and she grew up fearless and adventurous, always trying to keep up with her brothers and sister. The turn of the century found the Landry family well established and respected throughout the region. Isaac had achieved everything he had dreamed of and more, but he always said his greatest success was his marriage to Rebecca. They had weathered storms, literal and figurative, had built something lasting and beautiful, and their love had only deepened with time. On a spring evening in 1900, they celebrated their 19th wedding anniversary with their children and grandchildren. For James had married a sweet girl named Emma, and they had 2 children of their own. The house was full of noise and laughter and love, and as Rebecca watched Isaac lift his young grandson onto his shoulders, her heart swelled with gratitude. After everyone had gone home or to bed, Rebecca and Isaac took their customary walk around the property, something they had been doing for years. The night was warm and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. They walked hand in comfortable silence, following the familiar paths they had walked together countless times. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked as they paused at the crest of a small hill overlooking the house and outbuildings. "About how blessed we are," Rebecca said. about how different my life could have been if I had never met you, about how grateful I am for every single day we have had together." "I am the grateful one," Isaac said, pulling her close. "You took a chance on a cowboy with big dreams and not much else. You gave me a family, a real home, a life worth living. Everything good in my life traces back to that moment when you said you would stay." "We saved each other," Rebecca said firmly. "You were as lonely as I was, even if you did not realize it. We both needed someone to love, someone to build a life with. We were lucky to find each other." "It was not luck," Isaac said. "It was fate. It was meant to be. You were always supposed to be mine, and I was always supposed to be yours. We just had to find our way to each other." Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and leather and the faint smell of horses that never quite washed away. "I love you, Isaac Landry. I have loved you since the beginning, and I will love you until the end. And I love you, Rebecca Landry. More than words can ever say." They stood there together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And as they walked back toward the house, toward the warm lights and the family waiting within, Rebecca thought once more about that frozen, hopeless girl she had been. And she sent up a silent prayer of thanks that she had found the courage to keep going, to accept help when it was offered, to believe in the possibility of happiness even when it seemed impossible. The years that followed were gentler, the pace of life slowing as Isaac and Rebecca entered their 60s. James took over most of the ranch operations, proving himself to be as capable and hardworking as his father. Rose married a rancher from a neighboring county and moved to his property, though she visited often with her growing family. Matthew went to college in Topeka to study agriculture, returning with modern ideas about ranch management that he implemented alongside James's more traditional methods. And Catherine, the youngest, showed signs of becoming a writer, filling notebooks with stories and observations about ranch life. In 1908, Isaac and Rebecca celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them and a simple meal. Isaac had been feeling his age lately, the decades of hard physical labor taking their toll on his body. But his spirit was as strong as ever, and his love for Rebecca burned as brightly as it had on the day they married. 27 years, Isaac mused as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "It seems like both a lifetime and no time at all." "I know what you mean," Rebecca said. "Sometimes I still feel like that girl you rescued from a frozen Kansas winter. And sometimes I feel every one of my 61 years. You are as beautiful now as you were then," Isaac said seriously. "More beautiful because now I know every line on your face, every expression, every mood. I know your strength and your kindness and your fierce love for our family. You are beautiful inside and out, and I fall in love with you all over again every day." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "How do you still have the power to make me cry after all these years?" "Because what I feel for you is real," Isaac said simply. "It always has been, and it always will be." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple, the colors Rebecca had loved since that first evening at the ranch when Isaac had proposed. The land around them was peaceful, the cattle grazing in the distance, the horses in the corral, the chickens settling into their coop for the night. Everything was as it should be, everything was right. "You remember what you said to me that night in the kitchen?" Rebecca asked. "The night you proposed. I remember every word," Isaac said. "I told you that hope begins the moment you say you will stay." "You were right," Rebecca said. "That moment changed everything for me. It was like stepping from darkness into light, from despair into possibility." You gave me a reason to hope, Isaac, and then you gave me so much more. You gave me love and family and a home and a purpose. You gave me a life. And you gave me the same, Isaac said, reaching for her hand. Before you, I was just going through the motions. I had the ranch, but it was just property, just business. You turned it into a home. You filled it with love and laughter and life. You gave me children and grandchildren and a legacy that will outlast both of us. You gave me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know I needed. They sat together as the stars began to appear, holding hands, content in each other's presence. This was what love looked like after nearly 3 decades, Rebecca thought. Not the passionate intensity of youth, though that still flared between them sometimes, but this deep, abiding connection, this sense of being so completely known and accepted and cherished. This was what she had been searching for without even knowing it when she stepped off that stagecoach in El Dorado so many years ago. The years rolled on with their inevitable mixture of joy and sorrow. In 1910, they celebrated James and Emma's 15th wedding anniversary and the birth of their 4th grandchild. In 1912, Rose's eldest daughter graduated from the normal school and became a teacher, carrying on the family tradition Rebecca had started. In 1914, Matthew married a girl he had met at college, and they settled on a section of the ranch that Isaac deeded to them as a wedding present. But there were losses, too. Miguel died in 1913 after a fall from a horse, and the ranch felt emptier without him. Sarah, Rebecca's longtime helper, moved to California with her husband in 1915. And in 1916, they received word that Mrs. Henderson, Isaac's former housekeeper who had brought them together in a way, had passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. Each loss reminded them of the passage of time, of the fact that their own years were finite. But rather than making them melancholy, it seemed to intensify their appreciation for each day they had together. They made a point of telling each other, "I love you," every morning and every night. They took walks together whenever weather permitted. They sat on the porch in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing, treasuring the simple pleasure of each other's company. In 1918, as the Great War raged in Europe and the Spanish flu swept across America, the Landry Ranch felt like an island of safety. They were lucky, losing no one to either the war or the disease, though they knew many families who were not so fortunate. Rebecca organized relief efforts for affected families, sending food and supplies, and she and Isaac donated generously to the war effort by 1920. Isaac was 72, and Rebecca was 73. Both remarkably healthy for their ages but definitely slowing down. James ran the ranch entirely now, with help from Matthew and a crew of hired hands. Isaac still went out most days, unable to quite give up his connection to the land and the animals, but he was content to advise rather than direct, to watch rather than do. Rebecca, too, had stepped back from active teaching, though she still tutored individual students and maintained her extensive library. She spent her time gardening, which she had always loved, quilting with her daughters and daughters-in-law, and spoiling her grandchildren, of which there were now 9. She wrote long letters to family and friends, preserving stories and memories for future generations. On a particularly beautiful day in May of 1921, the family gathered at the ranch to celebrate Isaac and Rebecca's 40th wedding anniversary. It was a joyous occasion, with children and grandchildren coming from all over Kansas and beyond. There was food and music and dancing, and Isaac insisted on leading Rebecca in a slow waltz in the middle of the yard, much to everyone's delight. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Isaac stood up and called for everyone's attention. The crowd quieted, and he pulled Rebecca to her feet beside him. 40 years ago, Isaac said, his voice still strong despite his age, I met a woman who changed my life. She was stranded in El Dorado with no money, no prospects, and very little hope. I offered her a job as my housekeeper, but what I really wanted was to offer her my heart. It took me a few weeks to work up the courage to say so, but when I did, she said yes. And that yes has made all the difference. Rebecca, you have been my partner, my companion, my best friend, and the love of my life. You have given me more joy than one man has any right to expect. So I want to say, in front of all these people who love us, thank you. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for staying. Thank you for building this life with me. There was not a dry eye in the gathering, and Rebecca was crying openly as she stood on her toes to kiss her husband. Thank you for giving me hope when I had none, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving. Thank you for 40 years of love and adventure and happiness. I would do it all again in a heartbeat. The applause was thunderous, and their children and grandchildren crowded around, hugging them, celebrating them, honoring the love that had built this family and this legacy. Later that night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Isaac and Rebecca lay in their bed in the room that had been theirs for 4 decades. The window was open, letting in the cool night air and the sounds of the prairie, crickets chirping, and a distant coyote howl. 40 years, Rebecca murmured, her head on Isaac's shoulder. How did that happen? One day at a time, Isaac said, his arm around her. One choice at a time to love each other, to stay together, to build something worth having. I am so grateful, Rebecca said, for all of it. Even the hard parts, because they made us stronger. But especially for you, Isaac. You saved my life in more ways than one. And you saved mine, Isaac said. We saved each other. That is what love does. They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms. 2 people who had found their way through darkness to light, from hopelessness to joy, from loneliness to love. And in the morning, they would wake up together, as they had for the past 40 years, ready to face another day side by side, partners in every sense of the word, bound together by a love that had grown stronger with every passing year. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Landry family continued to grow and thrive. In 1923, Catherine, their youngest, married a young lawyer from Topeka and moved to the city, though she remained close to her parents and visited often. In 1925, James and Emma celebrated the birth of their first great-grandchild, making Isaac and Rebecca great-grandparents for the first time. Isaac's health began to decline more noticeably in his mid-70s. He developed a persistent cough that worried Rebecca, though he dismissed her concerns. But she noticed he tired more easily, that his morning rides became shorter, that he sometimes seemed short of breath. She urged him to see a doctor, and he finally agreed, though he insisted it was nothing serious. The doctor was less optimistic. Isaac's heart was weakening, he said, worn out after decades of hard work and hard living. There was nothing to be done except rest, take things easy, and enjoy whatever time remained. Isaac took the news philosophically, but Rebecca was devastated. She could not imagine a world without Isaac in it, could not conceive of waking up in the morning without him beside her, but Isaac refused to spend his remaining time moping. I have had a good life, he told Rebecca firmly, a better life than I ever dreamed possible. And I have had it with you, which makes it perfect. So we are going to enjoy every day we have left together, and we are not going to waste time being sad about things we cannot change. So they did. They spent their days together, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. They looked through old photographs and told stories about the children when they were young. They walked slowly around the ranch, stopping to admire the horses and cattle, the gardens Rebecca had planted decades ago that still bloomed every spring. They sat on the porch and watched the sunsets they had watched together for more than 4 decades. One evening in late September of 1926, as they sat watching the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Isaac took Rebecca's hand. "Do you remember what I said to you that night I proposed?" he asked. "You said hope begins the moment you say you will stay," Rebecca answered immediately. "I have never forgotten it." "I want you to know something," Isaac said, turning to look at her. His blue-green eyes were faded now but still full of love. "I meant those words when I said them, but I did not fully understand them. I thought I was offering you hope, but the truth is, you gave it to me. You said you would stay, and that was when my real life began. Everything before that was just preparation. Everything after that was everything that mattered. So thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for making my life worth living." "Oh, Isaac," Rebecca whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You made my life worth living. Before I met you, I was just surviving, just trying to get through each day. You taught me how to truly live, how to love, how to hope. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Isaac said. "That is what real love is. Not one person saving another, but 2 people choosing to build something beautiful together. And we did that, Rebecca. We built something that will last long after we are gone." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Isaac's breathing was labored, and Rebecca could feel how weak he was, but his grip on her hand was still strong, still steady. "I love you," Isaac said softly. "I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you beyond the end. Whatever comes next, that love will endure." "I love you too," Rebecca said. "More than words can say. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Isaac Landry, the very best thing." They sat together for a long time, holding hands, watching the stars emerge one by one. And when James came to check on them later, he found them still sitting there, Isaac's head resting against Rebecca's shoulder, his eyes closed, a peaceful expression on his face. He had passed quietly, without pain, surrounded by the love that had defined his life. Rebecca held him for a long time, unwilling to let go, tears streaming silently down her face. She had known this day was coming, had tried to prepare herself, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of a world without Isaac in it. He had been her partner, her companion, her love for 45 years. How was she supposed to go on without him? But even in her grief, she knew the answer. She would go on because that was what Isaac would want. She would go on because they had built something together that needed to be preserved and protected. She would go on because their love story did not end with his death. It would continue through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, through the ranch they had built, through the legacy they had created. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like half of Kansas turned out to pay their respects. Isaac had been a respected member of the community, known for his integrity and fairness and kindness. But more than that, he and Rebecca had been an inspiration, a testament to the power of love and commitment and partnership. People told Rebecca stories about Isaac she had never heard, acts of quiet generosity and kindness that he had never mentioned. She listened to each one, treasuring these final glimpses of the man she had loved. After the funeral, the family gathered at the ranch. James took Rebecca aside and assured her that she would always have a home there, that nothing would change, that they would take care of her. But Rebecca shook her head. "This is your home now," she said gently. "Yours and Emma's and your children's. It is time for me to step back and let the next generation take over. That is what your father would have wanted." "But where will you go?" James asked, concern etched on his face. "I am going to stay right here," Rebecca said. "In the little house by the creek that your father and I talked about building years ago but never got around to. It will be close enough that I can see all of you, but far enough to give you space to run the ranch your way. And I will have my garden and my books and my memories. That will be enough." And so, with the help of her children, Rebecca had a small, cozy house built near the creek that ran through the property. It had 2 rooms, a bedroom and a sitting room with a small kitchen area, and a porch where she could sit and watch the water flow past. She moved in the following spring, bringing her books and her quilts and the photographs that documented her life with Isaac. It was a quiet life, but a peaceful one. Her children and grandchildren visited often, and she delighted in watching the youngest generation grow. She tended her garden, growing vegetables and flowers, and she spent long hours sitting on the porch, remembering. Sometimes she talked to Isaac as if he were still there, telling him about the family, about the ranch, about the little things that made up her days. And sometimes she could almost feel him beside her, his presence as real as it had been in life. She lived to see Catherine's first book published, a collection of stories about ranch life that was surprisingly successful. She lived to see Matthew's innovative farming techniques adopted by ranchers across Kansas. She lived to see Rose's daughter become the principal of a school in Dorado. And she lived to see James transform the Double L into one of the most successful ranches in the state, fulfilling the dreams Isaac had shared with her so many years ago. On a warm evening in June of 1931, 10 years after that first date in May when they celebrated their 40th anniversary, and 5 years after Isaac's death, Rebecca sat on her porch watching the sunset. She was 84 years old now, and she knew her time was growing short. She could feel it in the increased weariness, in the way her heart sometimes skipped beats, in the dreams where Isaac came to her more and more frequently, calling her name, telling her it was almost time to come home. She was not afraid. She had lived a full life, a rich life, a life filled with more love and joy than she had ever thought possible. She had been blessed beyond measure, and she was grateful for every single day. As the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in the familiar shades of gold and pink that she and Isaac had watched together countless times, Rebecca closed her eyes and let the memories wash over her. She remembered that first moment she had seen Isaac riding past in Dorado, the kindness in his eyes. She remembered the terror and hope she had felt accepting his job offer. She remembered that night in the kitchen when he had proposed, when he had told her that hope begins the moment you say you will stay. She remembered their wedding, their first year together, the birth of their children, the countless small moments that had made up their life together. And she remembered his last words to her, his promise that their love would endure beyond the end. She believed that with her whole heart. What they had shared was too powerful, too deep, to be extinguished by something as mundane as death. Their love would go on, in the family they had created, in the land they had nurtured, in the hearts of everyone they had touched. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, Rebecca felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She had been frozen and hopeless once, a young woman stranded in a harsh land with no prospects and no future. But she had met a cowboy who had offered her hope, who had taught her to love and be loved, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. And now, at the end of that life, she could say with complete certainty that it had been worth it. Every moment of joy, every challenge overcome, every tear shed and every laugh shared, all of it had been worth it. Because she had loved and been loved, and that was the greatest gift anyone could receive. Rebecca opened her eyes one last time, looking up at the stars scattered across the velvet sky, and she smiled. She could almost hear Isaac's voice on the wind, calling her name, telling her it was time to come home. And she was ready. She had lived her life fully, had loved completely, and now she was ready to see her beloved again, to be reunited with the man who had saved her all those years ago in a frozen Kansas town. "I am coming, Isaac," she whispered to the stars. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for everything. I love you." And as the night deepened and the creek whispered its eternal song, Rebecca Thompson Landry closed her eyes for the last time, a peaceful smile on her lips, her heart full of love and gratitude and hope. She had said she would stay all those years ago, and she had kept that promise, building a life and a legacy that would endure long after she was gone. And now, at last, she was going home, back to the arms of the man who had given her everything, the cowboy who had taught her that hope begins the moment you say you will stay. The next morning, James found her on the porch, still sitting in her chair, her expression serene. They buried her next to Isaac in the small family cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch, and the whole county turned out to say goodbye. The minister spoke of her life, her kindness, her strength, her enduring love for Isaac. But it was James who gave the eulogy that truly captured who Rebecca had been. "My mother taught us many things," he said, his voice steady despite his grief. "She taught us to work hard, to be honest, to treat everyone with respect, but most of all, she taught us about love. She and my father had the kind of love that most people only dream about, the kind that lasts a lifetime and beyond. They found each other when they both needed someone, and they built something beautiful together. This ranch, this family, everything we are is because of their love. And that love will continue through us, through our children, through all the generations to come. So we do not say goodbye to Rebecca Landry. We say thank you. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like. Thank you for giving us this legacy. Thank you for staying, all those years ago when my father asked you to, because that choice changed everything for all of us." As they lowered Rebecca into the ground beside Isaac, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the cemetery in golden light. And if you believed in such things, you might have imagined two figures walking hand in hand across the prairie. A cowboy and the woman he loved, reunited at last, their love story complete but never truly ended. Because love like theirs does not die. It transforms, it endures, it lives on in the hearts and lives of everyone it touches. And the story of Isaac and Rebecca Landry, of a frozen and hopeless woman who met a cowboy who gave her hope, would be told and retold for generations. A testament to the power of love, the importance of hope, and the beauty of two souls finding each other against all odds and building something that would last forever. The Double L Ranch continued to thrive under James's management, and eventually under his children and grandchildren. The little house by the creek where Rebecca had spent her final years was preserved as a memorial, filled with photographs and mementos of Isaac and Rebecca's life together. Visitors came from all over to hear the story of the ranch's founding, of the love that had built it, of the legacy that endured. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the prairie in shades of gold and pink, painting the sky with the colors Isaac and Rebecca had loved, people said you could still feel their presence, still sense the love that had sanctified this land. It was a place of hope, they said, where anyone who had lost their way could find themselves again, where anyone who had given up on love could learn to believe again. Because this was where hope had been born on a frozen winter day in 1881, when a desperate woman and a kind-hearted cowboy had found each other and chosen to build a life together. And that hope, like their love, would never die. It would live on forever, a light in the darkness, a promise that better days were always possible, that love could conquer anything. And that hope truly does begin the moment you say you will stay.